Our next exercise is aging grouse wings. And today we're going to use greater prairie chicken wings, but you could potentially use ptarmigan or sharp-tailed grouse, ruffed grouse. This works on several grouse species. It does not work on their galliform cousin, ringneck pheasant. So it'll work for several of our Great Plains prairie grouse. And in Nebraska, we'll have both sharp-tailed grouse and prairie chicken that this can be applied to. So this is often used by managers as they try to look at productivity in the fall. The hunters will clip off a wing after they shoot the bird and submit it to the biologist. And then the biologist will take that information and will determine age ratios and by the young per adult, and we're going to call young today hatch year. We're going to be using the term hatch year because they were shot in the year that they hatched, and so hatch year HY. And we're going to be talking about adults, and so we'll also refer to those as after hatch year birds sometimes. And so that hatch year per after hatch year ratio will give us a productivity estimate for the year that can be compared to other years. So that's what we're going to do with this data eventually, but we need to gather it first. And so we need to look at a prairie chicken wing. There are primary feathers here, and we're going to be looking at two of those primary feathers in particular. Each prairie chicken wing has 10 primary feathers, and they're numbered in a certain way. So I've started a little really bogus drawing of a prairie chicken here. The wing would look like this, and so if you think of that outer now, it still has primary or secondary feathers there, but this group of 10 primary feathers is then numbered from the outer edge. So 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, all the way to the first primary feather. We're going to be worried about the outer two today, 9 and 10, and we'll also be looking at 8 and 7. And the philosophy of this is, so here's what a mostly fully formed prairie chicken wing looks like. The 10th primary on a nicely grown out wing is always a little shorter. So all these primary feathers have different lengths, and that's just the way it is. These here, like from about 6 onwards are the longest, and this 10th one is going to be just a little bit shorter. The 9th one also is a smidge shorter. So that's the way it's supposed to be. So we should start by looking at this wing because that's the way a fully formed wing would look like, with no molt going on. And molt is when they lose these feathers each year, and a new one will grow in to replace that, so that these always have nice fresh feathers for that year to fly with. All right, so we're worried about those last 4 feathers I said. The idea is that a juvenile bird, a hatch year bird, has just been hatched by definition, and so all of its feathers are pretty new. I mean, they started growing in like June, late May, June, and some birds even into July when they were hatched and they started to grow. And so they don't have as much reason to molt all of their feathers. And indeed, they have a little less time to do that. And so we never say never in wildlife biology, bird biology, but most hatch year birds will not molt these last 2 primary feathers, the 9th and the 10th. Okay, so the 9th and the 10th on most hatch year birds will be retained while they will molt the inner ones. And they're going to start at the inside, and they're going to molt one feather at a time, so you'll see a couple feathers growing in, and they do that so they can keep flying. Okay, geese have a synchronous molt, and they'll lose all their primary feathers, and for a brief period of time geese lose all their primaries, and they're essentially flightless. And so that's one reason that biologists can round up geese just by driving them onto the shore in the late summertime, is because if they hit that flightless period, the birds can't fly away, and that's when the geese banding can occur. But you can't do that with a prairie chicken. You can't do that with a sharp-tailed grouse, because they're going to be an asynchronous molt. They're going to molt one feather at a time so that they can retain the rest and they can still fly during this period. All right, so that's what our wing looks like, and we've got the general idea that this 9th and 10th feather are not going to be molted by our juvenile birds. They're going to be molted by our adult birds. And it just so happens, this is the stuff that we have to figure out as wildlife managers, wildlife biologists. It just so happens that during the fall hunting season, whatever age you are, usually the last 2 feathers of the molt process are growing in as birds are being shot. And so if the last 2 feathers, if one of these last 2 feathers is shorter than they should be, then if we see one of those shorter than it should be, we're going to say that it's an adult, because we know the juveniles don't usually molt those 2 feathers. So if one of these 2 feathers is shorter, it has to be an adult. If one of these 2 feathers, the 7th and the 8th, is shorter, then we know that it's a hatchier bird, a juvenile bird. Okay, so this one's fully formed, so let's take a look at some examples here. So here's a wing. Which one looks shorter compared to the previous wing? Well, this 8th primary looks shorter, doesn't it? According to the previous example, it should be out here. So we look at our cheat sheet here. If the 7th and 8th are shorter, it has to be a juvenile. So we can put that in the juvenile category. Let's take another wing. Sometimes these are in different shapes. So this is actually the right wing. We were looking at left wings before. And take a look at this one. Sometimes you have to turn these wings over. And we can actually see it's such a new feather. We can actually see the feather sheaths are right here. And these feathers, so this 10th feather is just brand new coming out, and the 9th feather is also growing in. So the 9th and 10th feathers shorter, the 9th and 10th primaries. We look at our cheat sheet, and this one would be an adult then. So we'll put that in the adult pile. Here's another one. What do we have? Okay, we've got a short 9th and 10th one again, don't we? Those should be up here. So we'll put that one into the adult pile. Here's another example. We spread those out, and we've got a short 8th primary, right? So what's that? Well, we can look over here and remember that that's supposed to be a juvenile. So we can put that there. Just a couple more to practice. There's a short 8th. All right. You can turn it over and look as well and check to make sure nobody's hiding on us here. But we've got a short 8th. So that again tells us that this one is a juvenile. And I picked one more example that looked like an adult, and you can tell the adult because it's got the short 10th. Okay, this one just has one that's shorter. The 9th has already grown up and is pretty much full size by now, but that 10th primary is a lot shorter than it normally is, so this would be an adult. And if we look at these, now these have been sitting around in our collection, but we can also see that right after they come in, see how nice that feather is. It hasn't been frayed. The ends, there's a little, sorry for the wiggle, there's a little bit of wear on that one, but that may be from just sitting in our collection. So these feathers, you can also on a nicely fresh harvested bird look at wear to see that these newly molted feathers really have a gloss to them and a nice rounded tip, as opposed to ones that are worn. All right, so juvenile, and you can actually see here's a little bit of feather wear on this feather that hasn't been molted. Right here at the tip, just not as fresh as this newly molted feather in that juvenile. And adult, based on which primaries are coming in. 9th and 10th, those are only molted by the adults. So if those are growing in during hunting season, we've kind of captured them in time, they're an adult. If it's the 7th and 8th, then we know it's a juvenile. And that's how it's done.